A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thank you so much for tuning into another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. It is great to have you with us once again. Coming up here in just a couple of minutes, Mr. Alan Gottlieb is going to join us from the Second Amendment Foundation. We're going to be talking about an issue that is taking place right now in states across the country. It's not getting a ton of attention, even among gun owners, but it absolutely should. It is the fight over firearms preemption laws and the attempts by gun control advocates to weaken or simply eradicate those laws that are on the books in 44 states around the country. And allow for the state legislature to set a uniform standard of gun laws from throughout the entire state. Gun control advocates hate this for a number of reasons, as Alan will get into. And in 2020, this is going to be one of the big fights. It does not get as much attention as Robert Francis, Beto O'Rourke calling for a gun ban, saying, "Hell yeah, we're taking your guns." The media focuses on stuff like that. The media is barely covering these firearm preemption fights, and when they do, they're covering them all from a local angle. So a judge in Pittsburgh strikes down Pittsburgh's challenge to the state's firearms preemption law, and the media reports on what happened specifically in Pittsburgh. Edmonds, Washington, a judge strikes down a safe storage law that the city passed in violation of the state's firearms preemption law, and the media reports on that, again, in isolation. But what we're seeing from Washington State to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to Columbus, Ohio, to Missoula, Montana, and dozens of other jurisdictions around the nation, again, are these attacks on firearm preemption. But I do want to get to a couple of other stories before we talk with Alan Gottlieb. So it was last week, I think it was, that we had the story at Bearing Arms that President Donald Trump was not going to be pushing gun control anymore. Well, the rest of the media has finally picked up on this story, believe it or not. There's NBC, actually this is from the Maddow blog. Despite recent promises, Trump abandons blueprint for gun reforms. The ones that they would have taken him to task for anyway and said, this isn't enough. Trump, you're not out there banning guns. You're not out there calling for universal background checks. You're not out there calling for gun license. You're not out there calling for a tax on guns and ammunition. What are you doing? You're still in the back pocket of the gun lobby. He was going to get that no matter what he ended up backing. If it was a red flag proposal, it was changes to our background check system. It was never going to be enough for the media. It was never going to be enough for gun control advocates. And frankly, it would not have done anything to address violent crime. So I'm glad that the president is backing away from those measures. Instead, he wants to focus on mental health. I think there's a lot that can be done there. President has indicated Senator Cornyn's recent bill has a lot of merit to it. I agree. I think there's some things that I'd change about it as well. But I'm glad to see the president backing off of that push for a red flag law and other measures. Also, it is the 1st of November. So in Oklahoma, that means that permitless carry is now in effect. And congratulations to all of my friends and family in the Sooner State. I spent 25 years in Oklahoma, grew up in Oklahoma. It is a great state, and it's always been very pro Second Amendment, so it's no surprise. I guess maybe the biggest surprise is that Oklahoma is the 16th state to adopt constitutional carry. I'm surprised it kind of took them this long, but it's amazing when you think about it that we now have twice as many states that are constitutional carry. If you can legally own a gun, you can legally carry a gun. Twice as many states that have that law on the books as states that have, let's say, California's concealed carry law or Maryland's concealed carry law, Massachusetts or New York City, this discretionary issue that says, we can deny you for any reason we want or for no reason whatsoever. We can tell you you can't get your concealed carry license. We might theoretically offer one, but chances are you're not going to get one. There are only 8 states in the union that still have those laws on the books. And while the Supreme Court is going to be hearing a challenge to a New York City gun law coming up next month, it is not a right to carry case specifically. But the Supreme Court does have a couple of carry cases in the queue that they are considering, including one challenging New Jersey's concealed carry laws. And so I have a feeling, and it is my fervent hope, that before long the Supreme Court is going to weigh in and say what we all know, that the right to bear arms is just as real as the right to keep arms, and that too shall not be infringed. All right, let's get to our interview with Alan Gottlieb talking about the attacks on firearm preemption around the country. Take a look and a listen. Alan, it is so good talking with you today. Thanks for taking some time, sir.
Always my pleasure.
And congratulations on a couple of big victories, including one in Edmonds, Washington recently, where the city is trying to institute its own safe storage law. And it's interesting because you've got a judge in Seattle that says, well, Seattle can have a gun storage law, but now you got this judge in Edmonds saying, nope, that violates Washington State's firearms preemption law. And it really seems like firearms preemption is being attacked not only in Washington State, but all around the country right now.
It is. And of course, the Seattle case is on appeal, and we expect to win that eventually as well. But talking about being attacked all over the country, we also there was the victory in Pittsburgh, where Pittsburgh's anti-gun law got struck down. That state preemption law preempted it. The anti-gunners all across the country are trying to get rid of preemption, state by state, either by repealing it or by ignoring it and passing their laws and hoping that liberal judges, anti-gun judges in the courts will just, affirm what they're doing. And the reason, Cam, we're getting such an attack on preemption laws is that a lot of our cities in our country are controlled by, anti-gun council members. And Bloomberg and his anti-gun groups have been pushing them to go ahead and pass various laws that conflict with state preemption. And the logic here is to try and make us fight a battle, in thousands of places across the country at the same time, which makes it difficult for us to win them all. And Bloomberg is offering, his Everytown group is offering these cities legal counsel advice and, helping them to defend the laws in courts so they come out of the city budget. So we've got an anti-gun group really spending money to defend these laws all across the country.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think a lot of gun owners don't realize this, but Everytown, they've got not every, do they have Everytown for gun safety? They have the Everytown Creative Council, which is active in Hollywood, but they have their own litigation group, right? I believe at least a dozen attorneys whose only job is to work for the gun control group and to, as you say, assist these cities as they try to undo firearms preemption. And not only does it create this patchwork quilt of local laws that gun owners have to try to keep track of, but as you say, it makes it exponentially more difficult for groups like the Second Amendment Foundation and others to pursue litigation, because it's not like now you're suing the state of Washington. Now you're suing Edmonds. Now you're suing Seattle. And again, if they can put dozens of more of these local ordinances on the books, is going to be challenging for our side's resources to be able to push back against every one of them.
That's exactly what they're trying to attempt to do. And not only do they have their attorneys on staff doing it, but they're getting a lot of free pro bono work from some of the nation's major leftist center law firms around the country that have got very activist in pushing for gun control.
Now, there are 44 states right now that have firearms preemption laws on the books, so they have their work cut out for them. And thankfully, again, we've seen judges in Pittsburgh and in Washington State recognize, Montana as well. Billings, Montana had their quote-unquote universal background check law, or Missoula, Montana had their background check law struck down by the state Supreme Court there. So they've not been successful in convincing a state Supreme Court to strike down firearms preemption. But as you say, they're also working on the legislative side. I know in Virginia, we've got our elections next Tuesday. If Democrats take control of the legislature, one of the things that they will pass is a bill allowing local municipalities to set their own gun control laws. And so we could see these really sweeping gun control laws, not only at the state level, but even more restrictive laws put in place in places like Richmond, Arlington, Northern Virginia, the D.C. suburbs, where all of a sudden now the Second Amendment right is turned into a privilege.
Yeah, that's really true. And some of this is a pushback against some of the successes that we have had. We have a legal preemption project at the Second Amendment Foundation that has actually removed over 500 anti-gun laws across the country in those 44 states.
Wow.
Without even going to court, just threatening to file suit against the cities and forced them to repeal laws that are currently on the books. Some of them are as dumb and crazy as you're not allowed to have, even if you're allowed to carry concealed, you can't have a firearm at a cemetery. It's crazy. But we've gotten over 500 of these anti-gun laws off the books around the country, and so this is their pushback because we've been very, very successful in getting rid of laws off the books. And they like to claim, of course, that courts never remove anti-gun laws off the books. And, we win these pirate victories. But the truth of the matter is we've gotten rid of a lot of laws. I mean, not just the gun bans in Chicago and Washington, D.C., but over 500 smaller ones all across the country.
Absolutely. And, and it's interesting because I think this issue is flying under the radar for maybe a lot of folks on both sides of this issue. It's not quite as, high profile and sexy as we're going to ban these guns and take them from you. It's not, out there calling for confiscation of the most commonly owned rifle in America. But this attack on preemption, I think, is just as dangerous as some of these more high-profile gun control proposals that we've been hearing.
Well, you have cities again like Pittsburgh that wanted to actually ban guns under preemption. So sometimes it does go as far as banning guns or confiscation. Once they get their foot in the door, they're going to push their whole agenda through, which we know is eliminate private ownership of firearms possession in the United States.
Talking again with Alan Gottlieb of the Second Amendment Foundation. So, how big an issue do you think this fight is going to be in 2020, Alan?
It's a giant fight in 2020. I think gun owners are really engaged very early in the 2020 election cycle right now, understanding and realizing the importance of, one, getting Trump reelected so we get more pro-gun judges appointed, nominated, and confirmed to our courts, which is extremely important, and they'll have an impact on gun rights for decades to come. And likewise, if the Democrats get control of the Senate and keep control of the House, you're going to see all kinds of anti-gun legislation flying across the country. And as you know, Cam, every single Democratic presidential candidate has come out for some form of, gun bans or confiscation.
Mm-hmm.
So the bottom line here is that we are in a bigger fight than we've ever been before. But luckily, when I go around the country traveling and speaking at various events, gun owners around the country understand it. They're engaged, and I think the other side's woken up a sleeping giant, particularly in the battleground states.
I suspect that you are correct. I hope that you are correct. It seems to me, I live in Virginia, which is one of those battleground states, and I know that there are a lot of gun owners right now who have been very active, volunteering, trying to get the vote out. And we're sort of the canary in the coal mine. If any gun owner thinks that this is just business as usual, I want you to pay attention to what happens in Virginia next week, because there's the potential that if we lose those legislative majorities, this state, which has not passed a gun control law in 20 years, we could pass 20 gun control laws in the next legislative session. This is as significant and as serious a time for a right to keep and bear arms as I've ever seen. Even though we have the protections of the Heller decision, the McDonald decision, we have the Supreme Court that's going to be hearing the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association case next month. There are things that are going our way, but that doesn't mean that those threats have subsided at all.
That's really true, and I am very concerned about your home state of Virginia, because the other side, the Bloomberg people et al., are spending of about 7-1 in the election cycle there, and that kind of spending has severe consequences. This year there's only 2 states that have elections coming up, New Jersey and Virginia, so it's very easy for the anti-gunners to pool their resources and target one state. And that's what they've done in Virginia. And so I'm very concerned about that. They won't be able to get away with that in 2020, but they can surely get away with it in 2019. Absolutely.
And unfortunately, they've got a lot of money to spend. So even when it's, a 50-state battleground, when you've got a billionaire like Bloomberg backing you, money's not going to be the issue. One last topic before we let you go, Alan. Today, permitless carry going into effect in Oklahoma. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm really glad about that. The anti-gunners in Oklahoma filed suit to try and enjoin that from happening, and the judge ruled against them. So they're still taking their legal battle to court with it, but they weren't able to enjoin that law from going into effect. So that's a plus for all of us. Absolutely. Alan Gottlieb with the Second Amendment Foundation. Thank you as always, sir. Great talking with you today. My pleasure, Cam. Thank you. We'll do it again soon. All right, time now for our Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day. And our recidivist report, which this one is I gotta say, this one really gets to me for some reason. Teresa Coker, 70 years old. She was killed in her home. She just moved to that home about 2 months earlier. And investigators say that the man who is accused of killing her actually knew her. Beaufort, South Carolina police say that Jermaine Thurston met Teresa Coker at her home that she had just moved into. They say took advantage of her kind nature before killing her.
Beaufort Police Chief Matt Clancy says it was determined that this was a homicide, manner of death, blunt force trauma, and strangulation. Unbelievable. 42-year-old Jermaine Thurston apparently was looking for some work, wanted to earn some money, according to investigators. He had done some yard work for Coker in the past. Police Master Sergeant Charles Rayleigh says on October the 9th, maintenance workers who went to replace a door at her home discovered her body. She had apparently been dead for a week. Detectives found her car in Seabrook, South Carolina, close to where Thurston lived. And WSAV reports that Thurston has a lengthy criminal history. As a matter of fact, he had been let out of prison just 5 months before Coker's death. He had been convicted of aggravated assault and kidnapping back in 2009. Chief Clancy says we can speculate on why he did it or what he was thinking, but any murder scene, it's a violent act, especially when you have an elderly woman who is minding her business in her own home. Jermaine Thurston's been charged with murder. He's being held without bond. He will be back in court on January 24th. Now, our armed citizen story of the day from Tulsa, Oklahoma, where a construction worker forced to defend himself at the job site, not quite on the job. The victim was in his truck getting ready to start the day when a man came up with a piece of rebar and began hitting the man's truck. He then tried to get inside that vehicle. And that is when the construction worker said, fearing for his life, he pulled out his firearm and shot. Police say the attacker died at the scene. Victim taken to police headquarters for questioning, but according to News on 6 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, police do not expect charges to be filed in this case. Tulsa Police Department Sergeant Shane Toole says we could always look at the flip side of the coin in this situation. Had this gentleman not been able to protect himself properly, he could have been the victim in this homicide. So we like our citizens to take care of themselves and to make sure that they're safe. And if they're going to carry a firearm, do it properly. Fair enough. But it is nice actually to hear a member of a police department say we like our citizens to be safe, and this could have turned out very, very differently. We're glad that construction worker is safe and sound. And finally today, our good deed of the day from Kitsap, Washington, actually Silverdale, Washington. Dylan Lipinski, in the right place, at the right time, and able to save a woman from her burning home. Dawn Ruth, who is 68 years old, says she owes her life to Lipinski, who is a Master Chief Petty Officer on the USS Pennsylvania. It was a Wednesday morning. Lipinski was dropping his son off at school about 7 o'clock in the morning. He was on his way to work, and he smelled something burning. He said, submarining for as long as I've been, you know that smell. At first, he said he thought it was a vehicle, but the smell faded as he dropped his son off at school. He thought it was coming from like inside his truck. And so as he turned onto a street, he said the smell returned, and he said he knew that something was wrong. So he pulled into a driveway and found a fire climbing up the back of a nearby home. He said, as I was calling 911, her smoke alarm started going off, and I started pounding on her door because the size of the fire was not going to get put out by a garden hose, he said. He said the fire was burning fast. He said he just wanted to get whoever was inside that home out of the residence. He alerted the neighbors to get out of their homes. There were propane tanks in the backyard. He stopped incoming high school traffic to make room for the fire engines that were on their way. Unbelievable. I mean, absolutely unbelievable. Ruth says, quote, he's a wonderful human being who cared about someone else enough to put himself out, and he gave me his jacket because I was freezing yesterday. She says, I was so cold and scared, and he made sure that I was safe. That is something. Now, everybody made it out okay. The sad news is that the home, basically a total loss. Ruth's husband is a Navy veteran. All of the memorabilia from his service, flags, keepsakes, burned up in the fire. But Dan Lipinski even helped out a little bit there. He presented Ruth with a challenge coin and said, I hope that this will be the start of your new collection. So in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing, Dan Lipinski, there in Silverdale, Washington. We thank you, sir, for your good deed. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. Thank you again for tuning into the program. Coming up on Monday, we're going to talk with one of the attendees of this weekend's Second Amendment rally, which I just found out is going to be taking place right about the same time and almost in the same location as the Washington Nationals victory parade for the World Series. So that should be a fun weekend in Washington, D.C. I'm headed up there. I will be speaking on Saturday afternoon. We'll have coverage at bearingarms.com. And again, a pretty interesting guest on Monday's Bearing Arms Cam & Company. You have a great weekend. Thanks so much for being a part of the program today. Don't forget you can subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Town Hall Podcasts, and more. We'll see you Monday with a brand new Bearing Arms Cam & Company.